This is Lauren Nemers, the registrar at the Harn Museum of Art, which is one of the museums of the University of Florida. She is going to talk about scope of collections and categories of collections. And here, Laura is going to focus on the museum point of view. She will be followed by Dean DeBolt, who is going to focus a little bit on the library point of view. And following the two presentations, we'll have a chance for a Q&A. So Laura, I'm turning the microphone over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Laura Nemers. I'm the registrar at the Harn Museum of Art at the University of Florida, and I'm here to talk to you about the scope of collections and categories of collections from the point of view of the museum. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about two topics, the history of the collection and status and types of different collections that you may have at your institution. I'm primarily going to focus on the Harn Museum a little bit. I'm going to give you some examples of that and a little bit of conversation in general. So I'm going to talk about the Harn focus and give some examples from our policies. So the history of the collection should just be a brief synopsis of your museum's history that can help your readers and visitors understand more about the museum's mission, the audience, the purpose of the collections, and the collecting areas. You'll also discuss how the museum was founded or what your parent organization is. For example, I'm going to just show you a little bit about what we have done in the Harn's policy, where we talked about how it was founded, created, and where we came from. The inception of the university as an art collecting institution started in 1965 with the University Gallery, and in 1988 the gallery collection was transferred as the museum collection, which eventually became the Harn Museum and opened in 1990. So as you can see, I've covered just the basic history of our museum and sort of kept it a little bit concise. Of course, depending on how large your institution is, you might have to have a little bit longer text for that part. We also talk about how they came to collect and what they came to collect. So for this one, under the guidance of the museum's director and curators, the collection was subsequently then redefined and expanded to represent 5 main collecting areas, which is what we are collecting today. So once the collection was transferred in, it was redefined and it was pared down. And so now I'm also talking about some of the maybe areas of the museum that are not as strong as those 5 main collecting areas that I discussed a few minutes ago. Because with the gallery transfer, we also took on significant holdings of Oceanic and Ancient American art, and then just recent years we've also added to our policy that we are collecting some prints and drawings before 1850, which did come with the collection, but we started adding a little bit to that. The point of adding the history of the collection to your collections policy is that knowing the history behind the collection and the museum can give you a better understanding in regards to your institution's philosophy and its approach to stewardship. So it serves as a guiding tool for where you've been and where you plan on going. Another section that I would like to discuss today is the status of collection. In our collections management policy, it's divided into 2 categories for the collections. That would be the accession collections and non-accession collections. With accession collections, you need to have careful insight, and it's going to demonstrate that the museum will preserve the object for the foreseeable future. Clearly, this is a big undertaking for you to take, so you don't want to take on objects without careful thought. You're going to give these accessioned objects the highest standard of care, which is also very expensive. And things can only move from this category through deaccessioning procedures, which can often be complicated. Your permanent collections objects are also accessioned objects. They are held in the public trust. They have the most complete documentation and at the highest level of research. Generally, more funds are also allocated to these parts of the collection. In the case of the Harn, we also have some weaker objects, which are also accessioned, which we've defined separately. So we have our main collecting areas, and then we have the other collecting areas which I discussed earlier, which would be the Oceanic, the Ancient American, and the prints and drawings before 1850. And even though we have these collections, we're not actively collecting in these areas. These objects are not researched as often. We still display them, but we do not have a curator that is devoted to taking care of these collections. Our non-accessioned items are also owned by the museum, but they are not accessioned into the collection. They don't meet the standards required for the accessioned items, which I just discussed as the permanent collection, but they can still fulfill the museum mission in different ways. For example, we have an educational hands-on collection. And these are some examples of some of the objects we have in the educational hands-on collection. These objects typically have some sort of look of authenticity to them, but we are able to let people handle them. Like I said, they embody the aesthetic of genuine items, but they are expendable. So since they are not accessioned, we don't have to worry about deaccessioning them. They are also not insured under the fine art insurance policy that our permanent collection is insured under. In addition to the educational hands-on collection, we also have something which we call our prop and display collection, and in other museums it's also referred to as a study collection. It's similar to the education collection in that it has some authenticity to the pieces. However, we often use them for display in areas not suitable for permanent collection objects. We use them to support and supplement our accessioned objects on display, and we care for them similarly to how we care for exhibition furniture, so they're not necessarily stored with the permanent collection. These could be things such as we have some African scarves that are actually African scarves, but they were bought from tourist places in Africa, so they would not go into our permanent collection, but we can display them on, for example, some of our Ethiopian crosses. The piece you see on the screen right now is a woodblock stamp from a piece we actually later accessioned into the collection, but we can display the stamp with the piece so you can see exactly how it was meant to be used. The piece in the previous slide, this one, and I apologize for the terrible picture, but like I said, we don't care for it in the same manner we do our permanent collection, is an African umbrella that we've used in displaying our African marketplaces and exhibitions. So we can put it out so you can get a feel for what the marketplace would look like, how it would have umbrellas, but this piece on its own is not really a museum piece that we want to accession and take care of in perpetuity. The piece on the right is kind of interesting. We have a cafe in our museum, and our visitors expect us to have nice artwork in that space. And so we have these pieces that are individual photographs of flowers, but we did not want to make them part of the permanent collection because they are in the cafe and they have a chance of getting things spilled on them. They're exposed to different odors from the cafe and that type of thing. So they're not accessioned. They're just part of our display collection. And we have a few pieces at the Harn that are for the cafe only. Another collection category that we've just recently started at the Harn is called our Museum's Archive Collection. This one just started about 1.5 years ago and was added to our collections management policy at that time because we received a large collection of Paul Jacquelet images that also came with Jacquelet letters. And the donor wanted to keep them together, and we had several exhibitions planned for Paul Jacquelet, and we wanted to display the letters with them. There's also a caveat that in the future, part of our museum archives could also be transferred to the University's Special Collections Department. This is an example of one of those letters. And the reason it's kept as a museum archive is that it is still a primary source document that the museum wants to keep in-house. It's related specifically to a part of the collection. And it does have research and educational value, and it's still art historical in nature. So all those factors are written into our policy, and they have to fulfill those before they can be put into the museum's archive collection. Another collection that the Harn has that other museums might have is called an asset collection. This consists of objects that were donated to the Harn for the purpose of selling, with the funds going towards things that will help with the museum. So the donors have to agree that they would like them to be put into the asset collection. They're not accessioned into the collection. And the funds that we acquire from having the asset collection go towards, in this case, conservation for things that we have in the permanent collection. And these are all things that we would never display. There's some tourist items, some things that just aren't the quality that we would have or just need extensive conservation. So like I said, the asset collection allows the museum to acquire property that can be sold to obtain funds for the museum. They're also not stored as we would any of the permanent collection items or even the prop items. They're sort of just kept on their own. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the scope of collections, especially for archive and special collection. I'm going to go through these initial slides a little quickly just to get them out of the way. Generally, archives are considered the official records of an organization or institution, such as a state archive, university archive. Museum archives tend to be sometimes the records of the museum itself. An archive can also be topical in that material may be collected relating to a common subject or a common theme. The examples, of course, are, we have some examples here of a state archive, university archive, museums and so forth. Special collections in libraries have always tended to be, since the early days, tended to be collections of material which were special. In other words, they had a subject or a unifying theme. And you had Smithsonian has a collection of books on fishes and fisheries and that kind of thing. However, in the early history of libraries, a lot of libraries received collections of art. They received art, suits of armor, and other kinds of objects that you would think would be more typical in a museum. Some libraries have retained these, and they become part of special collection. Some libraries moved them on to museum later on. In a museum, the archive might consist of the records of the museum and its agencies, such as the museum's history, their publication, their official records, such as their record minutes, the session file, minutes of the board, other kinds of things. The museum could also have a special collection, which might consist of the collateral material received with the object collection, study book, scrapbook, photograph, correspondence. Many people, when they donate a collection to the museum, they've been collecting all kinds of things about the thing, newspaper clipping, magazine articles, and so forth. University of Central Florida Special Collections consist of the records of the university, as well as Haitian folk art, book art, collection for rare books. Florida Southern University has a special collection that consists of books authored by the faculty, staff, and students, and so on. Special collections in libraries, like I say, have tended to be specific types of subject kinds of collection. Now, most university and college libraries will have an archive, which generally are the records of the university and the college. Most libraries also have a special collection, sometimes where the collections or materials, they have a unique subject or things which need to be kept together. In some libraries, they are combined, and some libraries have separate units. Museums, of course, may also combine their archive and collateral support and call it a special collection. But the whole point of all these definitions and what you want to call things, the whole point is that you need to have these, spell these out specifically in your scope statement and what you're doing. I've already mentioned the museum archives having different kinds of things about the museum and other documents. A special collection in the museum, like I said, could consist of the research collection. It could consist of collections that came in, paper materials, books, journal articles, vertical files, and other kinds of things. Now, to give you an idea of what happened at the University of West Florida, the University of West Florida opened for classes in September 1967 as an upper-level university. Amazingly, though, a year before that, in 1966 and even 65, the university began starting its library because we had to open for classes with something on the shelf. And so we sat down in the beginning and tried to decide what we should do. Our first president of the university kind of set the tone for it by declaring it was not the University of West Florida, it was the University for West Florida. And along that line, we went out and looked at the Panhandle, we looked at the other universities in the state, and we primarily decided that we were being ignored. The Panhandle region just was being ignored. There were not very many historical organizations. The state archive did not exist in 1967, 1966, and we needed research materials to support our classes. So that led us to the conclusion in the library that we should have a special collection, and that we should concentrate subject-wise on the Panhandle region of Florida. It's important to know the history of a collection and how you got it to its present form, and your scope statement should help you delineate that. It's not where you hash out your strengths and weaknesses. You could do that in a collection plan or a development policy. But the scope statement needs to be very clear to your staff and anyone reading it. So what does our scope statement say? It says, and by the way, I will mention we have changed our name from Special Collections to the University Archives and West Florida History Center because we felt that was a little bit better work for that. Our purpose is a regional research collection concerning the West Florida region, area, so that's our scope. Why does it exist? To support the research needs of the university community as well as other interested researchers, scholars, and users. And what do we collect? We collect materials regardless of format, and these materials should document the history and development of all areas of the West Florida region. By the way, that term, all areas, we mean subject areas. In other words, environmental history, geographical, personal, genealogical, all those types of things. And in further defining the scope, we decided that we would also define it geographically. And so the colony of West Florida, under British and Spanish control, covered most of present-day Mississippi, Alabama, a little bit of Georgia, a little bit of Louisiana, and of course the West Florida region stretching to the Suwannee River. And so therefore, before 1821, geographically, we cover that area as part of West Florida. So that means if a new book comes out today from where in Mississippi, and it's early county records or birth records from an early Baton Rouge newspaper, and it's covers the period before 1821, we'll acquire something like that for the collection. Now, after 1821, when the territory of Florida created, we defined West Florida being the region between the Perdido River on the west and the Apalachicola on the east, which covers the present 10-county area of the Florida Panhandle. This means that our scope statement says we don't collect Miami, Florida. We don't collect St. Augustine. We don't collect Key West. I don't have to worry about Alabama and things like that. It's important that your scope statement create an atmosphere that you know what your limits are. We also define our department as including the University Archive, which includes the record documenting the history and development of the University of West Florida, where we collect all of the publications and posters and student organization materials, faculty papers, and other kinds of things. The only catch with that is the faculty papers will sometimes lead us into other areas of our collection. So if, for example, one of our faculty members wrote a book on the history of Eastern Airlines, and she created a huge collection of material on Eastern Airlines and donated that to us, we consider those faculty papers. They also supplement a book written while this person was at the University of West Florida, so they're part of the archive. Well, that's a subject area, and it's sort of out of our area. The other difficulty that we have in our area is the fact that Florida is a migratory state, and so we end up with a lot of people in the West Florida region that move here and have saved us Civil War records and the family Bible and other kinds of very important research material. And in some cases, they have donated them to us, but on the condition that we not give them to another institution or that we have them there. So we have a Brooklyn history collection, which I wanted to give to the Brooklyn Historical Society, but the donors said, we want this preserved, we want this kept here, that kind of thing. So in some cases, some of our acquisitions are driven by donors and people in the area. But we have criteria, and this is our criteria for what we're doing: quality of material, currency of material, and the responsibility rests with me as archivist, special collection librarian, and also on research needs articulated by users, recommendations of scholars, and the development of existing collections, supporting the collection that we already have. With these kind of criteria, that means that I have the opportunity to determine when I don't want something. In other words, I have some criteria. We're going to be covering that a little bit later on in today when we talk about that type of thing. We changed our name of our department because I frankly got tired of trying to explain to all the incoming undergrads what a special collections was. At the end of every semester, I would get a few phone calls from people, and they were saying, please, please let me graduate. I will pay my bills on time. And I say, this is not the collection department. You do not owe your parking ticket to us. And I got tired of it, and I finally just said, we need to make sure that our name is more understandable as what we are. We thought West Florida History Center would be a little bit better because this is the focus of our materials and our collection. I think that's very important, is that you have a title of your collection and your organization, what it is. We also defined in our collection development policy, the types, collecting types of collections that we have. Now, if you noticed, our scope statement said regardless of format, and that lets me cover anything that comes along. So you probably will not see a line here that's CDs or DVDs, although you see digital media under photograph. But we have a long listing of these kinds of things that in our collection development policy to show the types of things that we're looking for and the types of things that we are collecting. We also have some other smaller subject special collections. Eudora Welty was a speaker at the university. She turned around and mailed her honorarium back to the university requesting that we add books to the library, so we bought a whole bunch of her autographed first editions and things like that. We had these other collections that have been developed. We do collect West Florida cookbooks, all the church groups and the little groups and that kind of thing, which is proved kind of interesting because we've had a lot of people move into folklore and interest in food culture. And we look for books about West Florida by West Florida authors. Other rare books are determined by the university archivist. We were given a donor gave us a bunch of money to purchase examples of books that we could show to our students. So we purchased a couple of leaves that were printed by Gutenberg around 1460. We have an illuminated manuscript from 1420. We have some complete Bibles from 1554, 1589, other things, because the person wanted our students to be able to see some of the early kinds of things and so forth. And our policy is broad in that we say other areas that might develop. And that's important because the university may move into other areas and other subjects that we're interested in. We also have, on the final slide here, I show a couple of things. In the upper right-hand corner, our editorial cartoon. We've received a huge editorial cartoon collection from Gerald Bowden, who's been the editor of the Pensacola News Journal for the last 40 years. We also have a collection of paintings of early watercolors that were done in our area in the 1830s. They're the only second group of paintings known in Florida done before Florida became a state, for example. We have a library of books that were handed down in the Pensacola family, and we kept them together. And then we also get a whole wide variety of other genres and things. But it's important that your scope statement indicate what defines your collection and defines what you're trying to collect. And we will cover a little bit of that a little bit later on today when we talk about some of the other things. Are there any questions?
This is Miriam, and we look forward to questions that are both for Laura Nemers and for Dean DeBolt. And I would say that what was so interesting to me as I listened to both of many of you have created collections within collections, and that your responsibilities shift from one to another. And I think that's an issue that we were talking about here during the conference room discussion a moment ago. So I think that was a really useful way to look at this. This is Miriam, and I'm going to jump in and say that we have a question here in Manatee County.
Hi, this is Baker Rehorn from Manatee Village, and my question is for Laura. We have some items in our collection that have been documented, added into our collection by a well-meaning volunteer. They are not artifacts indeed. They are more like you would have described that prop and display collection. Can you retroactively define what collection those items belong in?
I'm sorry, did you say that those objects were accessioned into the collection already?
We have a very strong accessions process right now. Basically, someone signs a paper, they donate an item, and this gentleman will document something just because it's in a room, assign it a number. He may not have any paperwork to connect to it. So we have things sitting around our buildings that are props, and they've been accessioned as though they were artifacts.
I don't know how your deaccession policy works, but it sounds to me like that would be pretty easy for you to meet with your board or committee and to redefine those objects and to be able to transfer them to another area of your museum. So, for example, we've had a few pieces that, for one reason or another, they got damaged over time. You know, they may have been part of our insurance policy, maybe not. But at that point, you know, we can discuss it and see if they fall into our deaccession policy, and if they do, we can meet with our committee on the collections and talk about how we can transfer those pieces. Our collection is actually owned by the University of Florida Foundation, so any time that we move anything from being accessioned to any other category, you know, even if we are going to deaccession it for sale, transfer it to another department on the university, we have to notify them. So there are, you know, steps that we have to take to make that happen, but it sounds to me like with those items that you probably want to pursue that.
Laura, what you didn't hear was a thanks and the body language that was expressing, aha, so glad I have a solution. Other questions? This is a question for both Laura and Dean in the chat box. Which is, what if you have things in your collections and there is no documentation and there really is nothing, I think is the tone of the question, and you want to get rid of them, rid of those things. Can you each address that, Laura from a museum and Dean from a library point of view? And we'll start with Laura.
I think it depends on the institution. With us, we would probably just end up keeping it and just keep researching it. I think you'd have to go through a lot of steps and you know that you've done due diligence before you take those kinds of steps. And then, you know, once you decide that you've done everything that you can do, you know, talk to your directors. We'd have to talk to the foundation, and we would also have to talk to our committee on the collections, who is our governing board as far as our collections go. But Dean, I'd like to hear what you have to say as far as the archives perspective.
Well, I think one of the I think in answering Bert's question, one of there's some question. We're going to be talking about disposition of collection a little bit later, and there is a new state statute about disposition of museum property. I think the question that we're going to have to answer in our archive is whether we come under that policy or not. Because the way it defines museums, it looks like we do. Educational institution, nonprofit, we do exhibit our materials, and I think that question is going to be whether I think the lawyers would interpret that we are a museum of paper materials. All right, because that essentially what our archives are. Archive were created to handle unpublished materials, and that is the paper, manuscript, and that kind of thing. Some archivists refer to these things as objects, and they'll say, well, this object is a piece of paper, this object is a diary, this object is a Civil War journal, you know, that kind of thing. But I think for our purposes today, I don't think it matters so much that we spend our time trying to split these things up into their genre. I think what matters today is that we understand that we have to have overall all these things. In my shop, I don't refer to genre so much as I refer to information. I use the term that our collection is a collection of information on the West Florida Panhandle, whether that is published or unpublished, whether it's a DVD or a drawing or a painting or a diary or a manuscript or a typescript or a computer printout or a database or whatever. And so we're dealing with information. And museums, from my point of view, are dealing with objects. We're showing information that is in a 3D form. And information about our culture. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about what we do when we don't have documentation. In museum and archive, we've always referred to these things as orphan. We talk about that in the world of books. When we talk about copyright, what do we do with books that are clearly still under copyright, and we can't track down any former relatives or authors or whatever. I think we will cover that in the disposition.
Is there anybody else who wants to jump on with a question or a comment before we turn to discussion around the conference room table?